So I'm with Father Etienne, who is in Rome. Etienne, what's the situation where you are as far as the COVID-19 pandemic is concerned?
Well, you know that Italy is one, well, with the UK also, one of the countries that's been the most hit by the pandemic in Europe. And also one of the first ones. And so we've been discovering what to do and what not to do without that much experience and anticipation. We've been in lockdown for more than 2 months and started 10 days ago, well, Monday, a week ago, to the first phase of deconfinement. Very simple things. It's still very severe, strict in the sense that we're allowed to go see our parents, friends, but not gatherings. Some shops are open again. We can go do individual sports, but there's still restaurants and pubs are closed, libraries are closed, and so on and so on.
And how has the church been responding? Because obviously the doors have been shut.
Right.
And particularly for Roman Catholics, this prevents worship and celebration of the Mass.
Yeah. Well, there's been a long period in which Mass was not possible. What's new is that starting next Monday, so we just have a few days to prepare, Masses will once again be possible, but with a lot of rules. Not more than a certain amount of people inside a building. Many Masses will be proposed outside. The weather's beautiful. I don't know if you can tell through the light, but so this would be possible. But with temperature checks, no more than 2 people per bench, priests giving communion with gloves on, and so on. But there's so this is one thing. The fact that we are near the Vatican. The Pope lives 10 minutes away from here, and if I go on the terrace of my house, I can see St. Peter's, the top of St. Peter's. We do feel his presence in this crisis. I don't know if you were able to watch at the end of March. I think on the 27th of March, there was this beautiful, also very eerie prayer where he was alone on St. Peter's Square. And I remember a Jewish friend of mine who's from Rome. So for Jews in Rome, it's also their Pope in a certain way. A Jewish friend of mine called me saying, "What did he just do? That was so powerful. Was it some kind of invocation against the pandemic?" And I said, "Well, it wasn't presented that way, but there is a spiritual struggle going on. And we know that the Pope is living things the same way as all the other people living in Italy, which means he does all his meetings through Zoom. The liturgical celebrations are really minimal, well, very, very minimal presence. And there's one thing is that, but he's been very attentive to the people who are suffering the most, to the poor or the isolated. For example, and this was a bit of a polemic at the beginning, because the Pope has always said you need to follow the rules the government gives you, but at the same time he has an official almsgiver, a cardinal who is his official almsgiver, Cardinal Krajewski. And Cardinal Krajewski opened the doors of his church, but this was, for him, it was an exception for the down and outs and those who are especially needy. And so I think there's this question of general rules and what do we do for those who are in particular difficulty?
And that's been a theme of this papacy, dealing with the vulnerable, supporting the vulnerable and the needy. And I'm wondering what difference COVID-19 is making. Is it accentuating that mission, if you like, of the Pope and the Church, or is it challenging the Church, or is it both?
Mm-hmm. I think it's both, in the sense that it's really been a priority for Francis. I know it's also a priority. It's really been a priority for Francis, and at the same time, this has exposed the vulnerability of many people. And I know that one of the big questions is what's going to happen next. What will be the church of the next years, or what will be religious life also for synagogues and mosques in the next years? And I think that before even starting to think about how we will adapt to the online situations and so on. And maybe I can say something about that in a few minutes. But what I really want to stress right now, because of your question, is I think the first priority is that we are going to be and we're starting to be in front of a huge economic crisis. And in a certain way, we're not called to do something new. We're called to remember that one of the main missions of the church and of religions is to take care of the poor and the needy. And there will be many, and there are many broken families also after confinement, and many older people who are living intense solitude. And I think we need, before even starting to reinvent the way we pray, we need to remember this will be one of our priorities.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. There is a financial reckoning to come, which will face all of us. And of course, those who are affected most of all are the poorest. And this is part of the mission of the church. I wonder whether one of the aspects of the papacy and of your particular work, of course, is the interreligious conversation, and specifically the Cardinal Bea Centre focuses more on Catholic-Jewish relations. Yeah. And I'm wondering what might be done or what is being done in terms of that collaboration. There was, of course, this interfaith prayer very recently. Right. Pope Francis took part in. But what is going on at the moment that you know in terms of the interreligious conversation in response to this pandemic and this crisis and this need for perhaps a return to basics, as you imply in your last comment?
Yeah. I'd say two or three things. The first thing, as you mentioned yourself, I think the big event was yesterday's day of prayer and fasting. That was organized by the Higher Committee of Human Fraternity, which brings together people from different religious traditions, and the Pope is very active in this. And I heard it's difficult to put numbers and to know what really happened, because all this has been going on in a virtual world. But I heard the Archbishop of Canterbury joined in. The World Jewish Congress was very active and has been sending me a whole bunch of mails inviting me also to participate. And the Islam Adiyan Foundation also, the World Council of Churches. So we have had this movement, and I think there is this feeling that there was a phase in which religions and religious traditions were facing each other and trying to find some kind of way of entering in relation. And right now is the idea, we're not only called to face each other, but we have a responsibility for others, for the world, which in, let's say, Catholic or Christian jargon would be diakonia, tikkun olam in more Jewish way of saying it. But so that would be the first thing. I think we feel this common responsibility, and that the crisis is not only economic or sanitary. It's not only a crisis for government, it's something where there is a spiritual dimension, and we're facing death and vulnerability, and this is a religious question.
I suppose following that, Etienne, something that I'm often asked, and I know you are too, which is the so what question. So what religious leaders come together and pray together? What difference does it really make? Now, you've given one very solid example at the beginning, which is working with the poor, opening up the doors of the church to the most needy. That's a very specific example. But are there others? Because I often get questioned by people saying, well, what difference does it all make? Mm-hmm.
A good question. There are so many ways of entering into this question that I am really struck, and I'm sure you are, and I think everybody, every time we meet like religious leaders or people who are in this field, we are very struck by the fact that so many more people are actually entering into spiritual life since the pandemic. This is a fact, is that priests are saying, well, my online congregation is much bigger than my normal physical congregation. The chief rabbi of Rome told me this recently, that when there was the day of Shoah, he was alone in the synagogue with a cantor and a technician. But he says, there's never been so many people online with us. So I feel that this has really underlined a spiritual need. I think it comes both from the fact that we are facing true difficulties. We are facing things that we cannot solve by human means. And as I was saying, I really think that the question of death has come up as we've been able in the past decades to set death apart. It's not really part of our culture anymore, at least in the West. But now we know that we are in front of this. And there's no other, I'm not even going to say solution, I'd say no other answer than salvation in this case. So this I think is one thing. And probably, I don't want to be too cynical, because this was a more, let's say, heretical way of saying this, but to be a bit more cynical, I'd say also the newness of being able to join religious celebrations online has sort of woken up the interest of people. But curiosity is part of it.
Father Etienne Vetö, thank you very much indeed.